that was like a legal license
This
to.
meeting is being recorded.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think we're 11 o'clock, 11:01.
Yep.
So we're ready for the blessing. Can everyone hear me and see me okay?
Where's my?
Yes.
computer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Let us begin.
Are you ready for the blessing?
Yes.
Okay, Steve.
Ready?
Ata.
Ata Adonai.
No.
Hail Melech Olam.
Asher
Shanu
Ata
K'tivanu
Mazot
Asot Divrei Torah.
Blessed are
Blessed
you,
are you,
Maya, God, ruler of the world,
who
who
has
has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to engage in the words of Torah.
Amen.
Sounds like
Amen.
Babel here. Okay.
Yeah. All right, Rabbi, let's talk about
Good morning, everyone.
ethical and ethical.
Good morning, everyone, and I hope everyone's okay. Nice to see you, B. Nice to see you, Lorraine. Good morning, Minya. Good morning, Evelyn. Hi there, Pam. Good morning, Bernie from Denver. Hi, everyone.
And Shirley is
Oh,
she's here.
okay. Hi, Shirley. We are dealing with one of the most important subjects in the whole Torah today. We're at Parshat Mishpatim, page 53, Perek Aleph, ethical and ritual mitzvot. So we're trying to differentiate between ethical and ritual commandments. So can anyone define for me what is an ethical commandment, and then what is a what?
I'm sorry, you're cracking. Your voice is cracking up, and you're not coming through to me clearly. Would you mind repeating that last sentence?
It's not good. I'll switch to a different computer. Is that true that everyone can't hear me well?
It was a
I hear
little,
you fine.
we hear
I
you,
hear
but it
you
was a
also.
little cracked up on that
Yeah,
last.
there's a little crackle.
It's fine.
Okay.
Maybe it'll
Well,
go.
I'll switch to another laptop because this is the new one, but I've had problems with this before. Anyway, I'll repeat what I said, and if it happens one more time, then I will switch over. How's that?
Okay.
And I'll try to switch over. And so this is one of the most important subjects that we're going to deal with, and everybody in our congregation should be clearly aware of this difference between ethical and ritual commandments. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
So the first question is, can anyone define what is an ethical commandment, and then what is a ritual commandment?
What's the word? I don't understand.
What?
I'll take a shot at it.
Okay. Bernie.
Ethical is between people, and ritual is between people and God.
Okay, so let's just deal with the ethical commandments. Give me an example of an ethical commandment and explain why it's an ethical commandment.
Don't commit adultery.
And why is that an ethical commandment?
Because it relates between people.
Okay, so then that clearly implies or clearly states that adultery is not considered proper, good, polite, acceptable, moral, ethical, whatever words you want. Give me another example of a ritual commandment.
Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy.
Yeah.
Okay, why?
Because it's between people and God.
Wait, another ritual. I'm sorry, ritual. Okay,
Right.
so that's between, and that, so that's not about, me hitting somebody in the supermarket. It's about how I act with God and with the cosmos.
Okay.
What about destroying the environment? Is that an ethical or a ritual commandment in your
That would
view?
be ethical.
Both.
Because
Well, yes. I think Bernie's right. I think it is both in a sense. You are, when you destroy the environment, you destroy that which God created, and therefore you would be offending him. And if we destroy the environment, we're destroying ourselves in effect.
Hi, Cy, welcome. So Evelyn kind of destroyed my trick question by answering it right away. And so I'm a little disappointed.
Sorry about that.
I thought I would get one or the other, and then I could say, I could make an expression and like, is that the whole answer? And then people would ponder and crumple up their foreheads, and then Minya might say something, and Pam might say something, and Marcia might say something. But Evelyn gave us the whole answer right away. So basically for us, this is pretty straightforward stuff. And the question, I'm sorry?
No.
He didn't mean that.
Okay. So Cy got his certificate last Friday night for being over 90 years of age. He's actually even older than that. He's over 100. And I said how, you know, he was my favorite Torah study student, or one of my favorites. And so we're very happy to have you, Cy. Okay, so any opening comments about this? Ethical and ritual mitzvot, very important to be able to differentiate, and it's a way to start building a theology out of this. Steve.
Aren't these laws also in another part of the Torah besides Exodus?
Absolutely. They're in many places in the Torah. This is we're now in the book of Exodus, of course, and much of this is repeated in Deuteronomy and possibly other places as well. Pam? No, okay. Minya? Marcia?
I understand that these are in the Torah in various places, but I have a question about when was God supposed to have given these rules to Moses?
This is a continuation of the last week's parsha.
Yeah, I realize that, and that's where I am. I mean, he had no wonder he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights.
Right, yeah. That's a lot to write down. Yeah.
And
So
he hammering in a stone.
So what's written in the Torah and what the rabbi said 1,000 years later are two very different things, and that's why you're confused, because you were raised with the teachings from the rabbis, and what the Torah actually says does not correspond to what the rabbi said it said.
Right.
So, but I didn't say any of this because I don't want to get in trouble, right? So this is just a secret between us. Turn off that recording. But in the Torah, it seems to be talking about a very limited revelation, that there was a very big event at Mount Sinai, which was last week. And at Mount Sinai, God and the Israelites came, face to face, essentially. And Moses took something from God, presumably the 10 Commandments.
Okay.
Later, the rabbis are going to say that that God gave all 613 mitzvot at Mount Sinai and all 5 books of Moses. But that's not obviously true. So how do you reconcile this? I mean, that's a large part of why we're Reformed Jews, not Orthodox Jews, because, we can follow scholarship. And so scholarship shows that the 5 books of Moses were written in at least 4 texts over a course of several hundred years. And so, so the commandments in the Torah, not counting the 10 Commandments for the moment, were written down at various points by different editors with different agendas. Does that help clarify a little bit briefly? No?
Not really.
No.
Well, it's like who decided this kind of thing, so it's these various rabbis or scholars that are basically wrote these very.
Well, who decided? So before we got to the rabbis, you have groups of people who were part of different religious groups within Judaism. One group that wrote most of the book of Leviticus, for example, are the priests. And that's called the P document for priest. And so the priests, a group of priests, of Kohanim, of whom I am a direct descendant of the main writers.
Keep telling us that.
They wrote stuff.
You're proud of it, right, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Yeah, but he knows we're not convinced.
They wrote and then edited material that they felt was relevant to their jobs and to the ritual in the temple they felt was very important. And then there was a text. Then there were other texts. And at some point that somebody, we don't know exactly who, put it all together into documents. And these became the 5 books of Moses, which were separate. And then you had, for in our case, the book of Exodus, which was an amalgamation of more than one text. And it started circulating in slightly different formats. And even as late as the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the 1st century BCE mostly, there were different versions. And then somebody came along around the time the rabbis and canonized it and said, these 5 books are going into the Holy Scriptures, and they're going in this version, and that became the Torah that we know. And from that point on, that one text was accepted. Does that help?
Does help,
Okay.
but basically when it says Moses received these directly from God, that's where I get a little funky about. I don't know about that.
All right. It's meant, they're trying to stress the sanctity of this.
The importance, and yeah, I get that.
And so if they say, my name is Shmuel and I live in the 5th century BCE in Jerusalem in a little house on the outskirts, and I was laid off from my job about a year ago and I had plenty of time, so I'm writing this scroll, and I got some of my friends to help write it. And we, is that going to sound more impressive, or does it sound more impressive?
Right.
God said these words to Moses. All right, I'm just being honest here, Marcia. This is what the scholars
I appreciate that
said.
because just.
And I can refer you to, dozens of books written by reputable scholars that will say this.
Sorry, has
In
his
the
hand up.
in the case of Leviticus, which I point out because it's the book that's mostly written by one group, the priestly group. Jacob Milgram was, his daughter is Shira Milgram, Reform Rabbi. He was a professor of Bible at University of California, Berkeley. And he wrote several books on Leviticus where he goes into great detail, who wrote it, why'd they write it, what was their agenda, what parts of Leviticus are not written by the priest or this group, how was it edited afterwards, why did they ascribe it to God in the way that they did? All these questions are addressed by Milgram. Sai.
I like to think that this was a group of people who want to take control of a very disorganized group of people. And so they set up these rules and regulations as they saw them, without any consultation with the other people. So whatever they decided they wanted is what they wrote down and expected the people to follow, which was kind of a very undemocratic way to run an organization.
But there was no democratic process at the time for Judaism. You wouldn't give each Israelite a ballot and say, what text do you like to be in our Holy Scriptures, that wouldn't work at all. You had to have some elite that could just do it and present it and push it. And then later, the book of Deuteronomy was either written or edited, and King Josiah, this is around 5th century BCE, or about 2,500 years ago, pulled it out. He was probably had a team of advisors saying, we need to rededicate people to Judaism. They're really slipping. And he said, look what we found. This is the word of God, and it was lying in the archives unexamined for a long time. But now we're going to read it and study it and follow it. And that was a way to do a religious reform. Now, why did people need religious reform? There was a lot of idolatry and semi-idolatry among the Israelites for many, many hundreds of years. Not among my ancestors, but elsewhere. I just want to make that clear. Bernie, am I saying stuff that you object to? No. Okay. I think the Orthodox people have long ago left us. If Barry Maltesh was here, he would be freaking out. But that's good that we're all okay with this. And I can document it. In other words, this is not my crazy theory. This is what has developed over the last 200 years from hundreds and hundreds of biblical scholars. Okay, let's read. Who'd like to start reading? Who's got a good, calming, clear voice?
I
Evelyn?
will. Okay.
Page
Ethical-
53, ethical and ritual mitzvah.
Mitzvah. Parashah Mishpatim begins with the words of God to Moses. These are the rules that you shall set before them. It then continues with a detailed list of the mitzvot or commandments that the people are to follow. It is a long list containing a wide variety of rules. There are commandments having to do with the treatment of slaves, the consequences of murder, kidnapping, or cursing one's parents, the responsibilities of one person to another in case of damage or neglect, concern for the stranger and the poor, warnings to judges and witnesses about honesty and fairness in court. There are also mitzvot dealing with the observance of the Sabbath, the sabbatical year, the festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, along with those prohibiting the boiling of a kid in its mother's milk, of worshiping idols, or even mentioning the names of other gods. While this Torah portion is called Mishpatim, or laws, it is not the only portion containing such a list of commandments. Throughout the 5 books of the Torah, we find hundreds of commandments or mitzvot that begin with the words "you shall" or "you shall not." Many of these are repetitious. The 10 commandments, for example, mentioned in Exodus 20:2-14, are repeated in Deuteronomy 5:6-18. And many of the rules recorded in Mishpatim are also found scattered through Leviticus and Deuteronomy.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. So therefore, you can see that from a scholarly perspective, that these different writers put different things in different places. So of course, there's going to be some repetition. If you believe in orthodoxy, to the extent that you believe that the Torah, as Marcia was confused about, that the sages said that the entire Torah was given by God to Moses, and therefore there's no repetition, it's not in need of a good editor, then therefore you must say that there's repetition. It only appears that there's repetition. There's really a reason why something might be repeated twice or 3 times. It's to teach us something. So this is, I guess, a exegetical approach to the text. And there's nothing wrong with us participating in that as well, as long as we understand that that is probably not how the text developed. Does that help, Marcia? Minya, is that a lot? Is that a hand?
Yes, I have a question. What does the phrase, we hear it all the time, prohibiting the boiling of a kid in its mother's milk?
Right. So we're not going to get into that in detail today because it's not our subject, but because it's so extreme, it's something that we need to talk about a little bit. So this is in reading number, let's see, where is it?
The bottom of the first paragraph.
Yeah, I'm looking where exactly it is in the Torah.
Oh.
But wherever it is, okay. What does this mean? And the answer is we don't know. But the logical thing would be that it's a humanitarian thing. So a kid means a little goat,
Right.
and people ate little goats. You're not supposed to take the little goat and put it in its mother's milk in front of the mother and boil it and kill it. Because possibility one, it would upset the mother more than just taking the kid away and killing the kid without the mother watching. Number two, you're using the mother's milk to kill the kid. So it's like you're using what the mother provides to kill her own child. So kill the kid in another way. Number three, maybe it was an idolatrous practice that idol worshipers in the area of Canaan at the time did this as part of their practices. So therefore, the Israelites, even if you're just doing it to eat, shouldn't do this because it might be confused with idolatrous practices.
They didn't have
Okay,
the dietary. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now, the rabbis 1,000 years later didn't really go for any of these reasons. They said, no, what it's referring to symbolically is that you should not eat meat and milk together.
Okay.
So why have this colorful story about boiling a kid? It's just to teach us about no cheeseburgers.
Okay. Thank you.
And where Religious Practices Committee is about to debate and vote on a new kitchen policy or a new eating policy for the temple, and includes no cooking meat with milk. So you can make, let's say we have a Friday night dinner and we have somebody making hamburgers. You can have cheese on a table and you could take a piece of cheese and stick it on your hamburger. But we're not going to make outside on the grill 12 cheeseburgers. So somebody said, well, if you make hamburgers and then bring them inside and people just take their own cheese and put it on the hamburger, that's not a cheeseburger. The only way it's a cheeseburger is you cook the cheese with the hamburger, which is now being made illegal in our for our temple functions.
I said they missed their calling, though. They should have been rabbinical students.
So somebody else said, but you can do it if you want and eat the cheese on the hamburger. And the person said, okay, but don't call it a cheeseburger. It's a hamburger with cheese placed on it afterwards. Pam?
I thought Reform Judaism didn't recognize the milk and meat thing.
That's keeping kashrut.
It doesn't. We're all allowed to observe what mitzvot are meaningful to us. However, when you're having a joint function in the temple, like a Friday night potluck, there's nothing wrong with saying, well, there's certain limitations so that everyone feels comfortable. So what they're planning on voting on, no pork, no shellfish, and no meat and milk cooked together in the same dish. And that's it.
Oh,
Okay.
pepperoni pizza.
Now, this is not saying that you have to do this on your own private lives. And it's not even saying that you have to do it in your plate. So if you wanted to bring a few little shrimps in a plastic bag and drop them into your salad, you could do that. But we don't want the shrimps up there in the front where they might upset somebody who doesn't want to see shrimps at a synagogue. You know, like I suggested that there be an exemption for like leg of pork.
What?
I'm just joking. But I'm just joking. But you can imagine that seeing a big pork roast at a temple might upset, even if it upsets one person, then we don't need to do that in public like that in the synagogue. So it's not really legislating kashrut as a system of eating. It's just saying how do we avoid offending people who might not want to do it. But the devil's in the details, as they say. But anyway, the milk and meat part comes from this. There's nothing in the Bible that says you can't eat milk and meat. Well, the rabbis say this is what says it, that it's repeated 3 times. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Now, does that mean what they say it means? I don't think so. But the rabbis are allowed to engage in creative reinterpretation, right? So that's why even Orthodox Judaism, according to my definition, is not a form of fundamentalist religion, right? Because the Protestants, for example, who are quote unquote fundamentalists, they take everything written in the Bible literally. Clearly, the sages do not. Even though they take what's in the Talmud strictly, and they're very rigid and they're very orthodox, they don't meet my definition for fundamentalism precisely because of Minya's example. Other comments on this or questions on this? Marcia, Lorraine? How many people here keep a modified form of kosher, even if it's just one, not eating pork or one thing? How many keep some form of a little bit of kosher somewhere? And how many people eat everything regardless?
No.
Eat it all.
And is there a third option? And how many people keep strictly kosher? We have a couple of people in our temple who keep strictly kosher, and I don't know, there's other people who keep some medium form of kosher, and there's people like me that just don't really eat pork. But if there's an egg roll and I can't see it, I'm not going to go ballistic over it, but I try to avoid pork.
And there are
Marcia?
people, excuse me, there are people who have kept strictly kosher in their own homes, yet have no qualms about eating pork outside of their home. So to me, it seems a little hypocritical there too.
And I had a rabbi friend who was fond of quibbing that for such people, their plates are going to go straight to heaven. But you could see it as hypocritical, or you could see it as trying to preserve some symbolic part of the ritual mitzvot in a way that would not interfere too much with their lifestyle. I guess it depends how they explain it and how both to the others and to themselves. Marcia and then Pam.
I understand. And, there are so many people in our congregation, I find, when talking to them, that were brought up Orthodox. And my father, I know, he came from a kosher household. He physically could not eat pork. He ate shrimp. I don't understand.
Oh, it's the VA.
So he could not eat pork. And so But bacon he could eat. I could understand that. But there was certain things that just wouldn't go. It just went against his physical self to be able to eat that, even though my mom didn't keep a kosher household, you know. But when we went to the Chinese restaurant, it was okay if he had a dish with shrimp in it, you know, or lobster if we went up to Maine, you know. So go figure, you know. But I don't think he would have approved of going into a temple or a synagogue and seeing pork or shrimp there. It's an emotional thing that you have to just let it go and go with the flow on that one, you know? Respect people.
Did I tell you when I was in Georgia, I wanted to try a suckling pig? So I didn't want to do that in Albany where people might see me. So I drove to Americus, about 45 minutes away, and I went to this very famous restaurant there. And I sat down at a table, I ordered the suckling pig. And just as the waiter's bringing this beautiful dish to my table, I see the president of my temple. And he's saying, Rabbi, what a surprise to see you in Americas.
That's a
Just as
sign.
he's walking from the left, the waiter comes from the right and puts the suckling pig, the whole thing, with the apple in the mouth and
apple.
everything in front of me. And the president sees it and looks at me in rather surprise and a little bit of shock. And I said, isn't this restaurant wonderful? I order a baked apple and look at how they fix it.
An old one.
Very good.
So that's a joke. It's not true.
But it could happen.
Yeah.
It could happen. So back to Marcia, Marcia, Pam, and then Bernie.
I did it, so it's Pam's turn.
Okay, Pam.
Well, back 50 plus years ago now, when I met Dave, he didn't eat pork. We got married, and so we never had pork. Now that I think back of it, we have never had pork in over 50 years. So and I hadn't really thought about it, but I guess it sort of became automatic.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't do bacon either?
No, we don't. We just don't do it. It's just, that's what happens when you meet a nice Jewish boy when you're in your teens.
Now again, this is on a separate topic, so we're not going to talk about it now. But I would argue that pork is in a separate category from all of the other dietary rules. In other words, in the Bible, there's a list of prohibited animals, and it's camel and pig, and others. So I would say it's like that as part of kosher, but it's more important, or it has a completely different symbolic purpose of not eating pork, which stems from the Maccabean revolt and its connection to the Syrian Greeks who tried to force the Israelites to eat, or the Judeans to eat pig as a sign of their rejection of Judaism. So I would say pork has two separate symbolic roles. One is part of the food laws and one as a part of the holiday of Hanukkah. Now, Bernie.
Your story about the suckling pig reminded me of a true story. My supposedly vegetarian rabbi in New Jersey almost choked on a clam in his clam chowder.
God'll get you.
God sends us little messages.
That was not so subtle.
Well,
And how does he explain that then?
yes. Was this a Reform rabbi? Okay. Well, interesting.
Be careful, Rabbi.
Yes, every time I go into a restaurant, there's a risk. Was there anyone else after Bernie? Lorraine, Riva, Sai, Minya, Evelyn, Steve? Steve? No? Okay. So looking back down here, we could see the stuff that that Evelyn read is that this parsha has a lot of commandments. And let me just, I'm just looking at Wikipedia here. And Wikipedia has articles for every portion, by the way. So, and other websites do as well. And I'm not talking about like commentaries, I'm talking about like a summary. And under the section reading, it breaks it up into each, we read, if we were to do a full reading of the Torah, it has seven sections, correct? So I only read usually a few lines and do one reading, usually. Last week, there was the anniversary of Denny and Bonnie, and then there was the blessing for over 90s. So I did two readings, right? I read a little bit, the Denny and Bonnie blessed, then I stopped. Then I had everyone rise to the 10 commandments, and the over 90s did the blessing, and a read, then they blessed. That's two. But if I was doing a full reading, I would read more, and I would read 7 separate readings. But in this week's Parsha, just to give you a little bit, in the first reading, there's laws concerning slaves, homicide, striking a parent, kidnapping, insulting parents, assault. In the second reading, there's more about assault, homicidal animal. What do you do with an animal that kills someone? Damage to livestock, theft. In the third reading, there's stuff about damage to crops, bail, seduction, sorcery, bestiality, apostasy, wrong the disadvantaged, lending. In the fourth reading, there's duties to God, political integrity, humane treatment of enemies. In the fifth reading, there's false charges. What happens if people are charged with a crime that's false? Bribery, appeasing the stranger, oppressing the stranger, the sabbatical year for crops, the Sabbath, mentioning other gods, the 3 pilgrimage festivals, sacrifices, first fruits. And it goes on. So this parsha has so many laws. Each parsha, there's more and more laws. And then in the Talmud, it gives a number to those laws. It's not mentioned in the Bible either. Rabbi Simley says there are how many commandments total?
613.
Okay. And in this parsha, there's a lot. Wikipedia would tell me how many, but there must be a lot. Okay. Well, I don't see the number right now, but there's a lot of commandments. Yes, Sai.
Yeah.
What's the mechanics of something becoming a law in the Torah?
Well, the Torah included it. Now, as we said, there's at least 4 editors or 4 texts, and these texts were put together by different groups. And as you see from the repetition, a lot of the groups had very similar laws or identical laws. So the priestly group, for example, might have put in some laws, although they're mostly concerned with laws about the temple. And another group might have put in the same law. Occasionally they disagree, but most of the time they have the same laws.
Well, my problem is, how do they relate some of these laws to the observance of God? Where was the connection? I find that in most cases there isn't any connection.
Well, some of them are about God. So you shall love the Lord your God, or you shall not worship other gods. So these are laws relating to the love of God, to the worship of God. Other laws are just about running a society. So what happens, for example, in this week's portion, there's laws about what happens if your animal knocks down the neighbor and kills him. Okay, so Sai, you've got these 4 120-pound dogs, and you say, oh, they're gentle as a baby, and they're not going to bite anyone. And they don't, but they knock down the neighbor, he hits his head and he dies. What happens? So that's not about God, but it's important. You need laws. Now, in today's world, we have the government, nothing to do with religion, and the government makes all these laws. So religion is left with a lot less to say and do. But in those days, there was no government, and government and religion were combined. And so the religion had to come up with all the laws.
So,
What
Right.
happens if refugees from Guatemala come to your neighborhood and they start camping out in people's backyards? What do? What happens if your neighbor borrows a plate from you and refuses to return it, and so forth? Marcia.
well, I was thinking as you were, even before you started going down this road, that it is basically a sort of a codified law book that was being followed. The 10 Commandments are obviously the most important of the commandments, and that's why they're sectioned out as being the most important. I think they are, those are highlighted, if nothing else,
Yeah.
on tablets. But the other laws are really common sense data, a lot of them, day-to-day common sense interactions with other people and how to handle it. And I think it had to be written down to make society workable.
Okay. Evelyn.
Reminded me that before these laws were promulgated, you had the laws of Hammurabi, which goes back even further, where he was the one who first began codifying codes of behavior so the society could continue to function in an orderly fashion, which is why many of these laws came into being. Society won't function or thrive with lawlessness or people doing whatever they want to do. And since there are so many modes of behavior that we would consider antisocial, it was necessary even way back then. And I think many of the laws that we have here in the 613 laws were actually, some of them were taken from Hammurabi or other earlier societies that incorporated them, realizing that this is how we can better function. I have a question, though. It's on the next page where Rambam,
Let me just respond to that briefly first. So yes, so the ancient Near East, whether it was in Canaan or elsewhere in Iraq or Syria or wherever, pretty much all these societies had their own versions of the Torah. And Evelyn mentioned Code of Hammurabi, probably the most famous. We can learn a lot about ancient Israelite society by comparing the laws of the Torah with these various other codes. This is the field of ancient Near Eastern studies. And, it's an enormous field. Okay, back to you.
All right, the one question on page 54 that I kind of questioned under Maimonides towards the bottom of the page, next to the last. It says, however, a law for which a person finds no reason and understands no cause should not be considered trivial. One should be on guard not to rebel against a commandment decreed for us by God, only because the reason for it is not understood. Then why don't they make us understand it? In other words, if the rabbis are so insistent that these things don't do because I say it, give me a reason why it should be so.
This is a huge fight in the medieval world. So medieval world, we're now moving from the biblical world, let's say, 3,000 years ago, to the Talmudic world, say 1,800 years ago. And now the medieval world, we're about 700 or 800 years ago. So Maimonides was, of course, one of the most famous Jewish philosophers, and he wrote a book of Jewish law. But not everyone agreed with him. So one of the big issues was, should we explore the meaning of the commandments? So we have all these commandments. Some of them are hukim, and some of them are mishpatim. So what's the difference? One group of commandments, we know the reason for them. They're obvious, or they're explained in the Torah or Talmud, or they're obvious. You shall not kill. You should not murder. All right, so why shouldn't you murder? You don't even have to be told, because if I can go to Fry's, if I'm bored one night and just start shooting people, and that's not a crime, and then every time I'm bored, I'll go to Fry's and shoot some more people. Before you know it, nobody's going to shop at Fry's. They say there's a crazy rabbi, he'll shoot you if he's in a bad mood or if he's just bored. So you can't go to Fry's. So, and you can't go to TJ Maxx, and you can't walk on the street. So it would make society impossible. So, and it's not just, right? Why should I be allowed to shoot people for no reason? Only way you can execute somebody if they've been, convicted of a capital crime. So that's obvious. But why shotness? To take the classic example that we've talked about at some point, why can't you mix wool and linen in the same garment? Nobody has the foggiest idea. We could come up with theories, but maybe they're true, maybe they're not. So in the medieval world, some people said we should explore, like Evelyn says, let's figure it out. And then other people said most of the Jews and most people at the time are illiterate. And if we start messing around with asking questions, they may not either understand their answers or like our answers. But once you start putting these questions in, they may say the whole system isn't true, and they may give it all up. So in order to keep people faithful, we shouldn't delve into things that are too problematic. Now, clearly in our group, we don't have that limitation. We deal with things that are problematic, but that's why Maimonides might have said that.
Okay.
Okay, B. Comments about either commandments that we understand or commandments that we don't understand, commandments that are ritually based or commandments that are ethically based.
I wonder,
Okay.
how with 613 commandments, how do the Orthodox, generally speaking, keep them straight in their head? Or is there a way of life such that it encompasses those and it brings in observance of those commandments? Because that's a lot of stuff that's very limiting.
Ask the question again.
Does the Orthodox community, they're expecting that they are observing the 613 commandments. They must live in a way that it just
It's restrictive.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah, but their lifestyle must accommodate that totally.
So let's talk for just a second about the 613 commandments. Maimonides wrote his Mishnah Torah in the 12th century, and he listed the 613 commandments, and others did as well. But of those 613 commandments, a lot of them are related to the temple, like at least half. And they can't be practiced without a temple. So that reduces the number quite a bit. But in Orthodoxy today, you have the Shulchan Aruch, which has thousands and thousands and thousands of laws. So Orthodox Jews today don't observe 613 commandments. They observe only about half of those, but each of those half have many, 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 many laws.
Subtext on all of them, basically.
So for example, from which shoe you put on in the morning first to every detail of life, to whether you can wear a particular suit, whether it has linen or wool in it, to everything. And that's a particular approach to religion, that you feel that every action that you take is based on a legal system. You have to like that whole concept. Pam, and then Cy, and then Evelyn.
Yeah.
These rules about this, what shoe you put on first, I mean, why would they have rules like that? I mean,
Well,
most of
because
the
in-
rules they have are to make people lead a better life. But that shoes just doesn't make it.
But there's the idea that you should have law that governs your life. So they don't want to say, well, what you eat, we're going to tell you exactly what to eat, but
Yeah.
which shoes do what you want. There's no such thing. Everything in life that you do, there must be it fits into the whole system of Jewish law. Riva, her husband was basically a follower of all this. Am I describing it correct, or am I exaggerating?
On and off. It varied over time.
Oh, but when he was more dedicated to Jewish law, is my description of the whole system accurate, or am I exaggerating?
He was very familiar with all of it and very knowledgeable about all of it, including the linen mixed with whatever else, wool. But in some ways, he was enormously flexible. At our house, we had 2 refrigerators and freezers, and one contained shrimp and other items, and the other one didn't. So within our house, we had 2 separate cooling systems.
But when he was in his more Jewish law abiding phases, did he consult Jewish law about everything that he did from morning to night? Or is my description that Jewish law becomes all encompassing? Because Pam says, I can see, when you pray, you need laws, but when you put on your shoes, she says, what do you need laws for that? I mean, but am I right that
It was not all encompassing, but in some areas, like the blessings, he'd walk out of the bathroom and always say a blessing. So in some areas he was very, very strict. In other areas he was very, very lenient. I had a separate item I wanted to mention though, and that is, for a while I went to Georgetown Hillel in Washington, D.C., which was really fun. And there they were eco-kosher. And they thought it's important and they were primarily vegetarians. Most of that group were vegetarians. So they did not allow any meat or meat products or animal products, I think including honey, I guess, within their kitchens.
No eggs? No eggs?
I don't think so.
Mm.
But so they consider themselves eco-kosher, and they believed in doing what was best for the environment. So I
Okay,
thought that was a neat way around it.
There was Pam, and then I think Cy, Evelyn, and then Bernie. So Cy.
I understand having Jewish law, studying Jewish law, but what bothers me is its connection to God. The law is there because basically God wants it to be, not the other way around. Let me give you an example. Today in Israel, there's a big argument on the part of the Orthodox that they don't want their people to serve in the army. Now, if they said God said that they don't have to serve in the army, does that change the whole picture? Right now, the rest of Israel says, yes, regardless of whether you're Orthodox or not, you have to serve in the army. God has nothing to do with it. It's a law of Israel. And this is what I'm trying to find out. Are these laws Jewish laws in the sense that they're laws for the people, or are they laws because God wants them to be laws?
Well, people manipulate things for their own purposes, right? I mean, the Orthodox political parties say that since ultra-Orthodox men presumably Okay, by B. Since the ultra-Orthodox men presumably study in yeshiva, studying in yeshiva, studying Talmud all day and all night is helping to safeguard the state of Israel more than somebody who serves in the army. So if you can swallow that one, then you can swallow anything, I suppose.
But what if
But,
God commanded that?
well, God, in the Talmud, it says you should study Torah, but it also says you should do other things as needed. So you need to earn a living and you need to defend yourself and so forth. And these are all, so how they can justify that, I don't know, I mean, they can say some pretty strange things. The chief rabbi of Sfat this week, Orthodox rabbi, who one of the more right-wing politicians wants to make the chief rabbi of Israel, he said that the earthquake in northern Syria and Turkey is to punish the enemies of Israel because the Syrian government's been so hostile to Israel. The problem with that, of course, is this earthquake's in northern Syria, where most of the people are not in favor of the Syrian government. So it makes no sense, so God is killing the enemies of the bad guy. And then in Turkey, he said, I don't know why God is punishing Turkey, but there must be a reason. I mean, they too must be enemies somehow. And I mean, that this guy is not fired for me. I mean, it's just astounding. So what can I say, Sty? Okay, who is next is Evelyn and then Bernie.
Okay, I want going back to the Orthodox rabbis. I know someone who is Orthodox, extremely Orthodox, and whenever she has a problem, she goes to the rabbi. Rabbi, what should I do? And it reaches a point where every time they have a problem, instead of thinking for themselves or working out a problem, they leave it to the rabbi to resolve it. And it seems to me that if the rabbi achieves this much influence within his own particular group, it's almost like a cult figure in a sense, where they're blindly following whatever the rabbi says. And I guess some groups like that must exist, but are they fringe groups or is this part of the Orthodox movement?
That's hard to determine. I'd say half and half. That's a really good question. But there are certainly, it depends on which Orthodox group, and many of these Orthodox groups have nothing to do with other Orthodox groups. So from us looking out from the outside in, they're all Orthodox, but from the inside, they're totally separate, many of them. But there are groups that, some of the Hasidic groups where, as Evelyn's describing, they rely upon the rabbi, the Rebbe, to guide them through personal decisions. And depending on whether they just consult and they use their own free will and judgment, or whether they just listen blindlessly, really does turn it from a religious group to a quote unquote cult. Certainly that is one of the essential definitions of Reform Judaism, that people think for themselves, that they're willing to study and think and then act responsibly. And that I'm a teacher and I'm a guide, but I'm not somebody who tells you what you should do and expects you to listen to me. And if you are looking for that, or you have that mentality, then you would not be eligible to join a Reformed temple on the basis that you are, looking for a cult, and this is not appropriate place. I think Bernie was first and then Pam, okay?
There was an episode of All in the Family that I remember that I did not realize involved a theological discussion where Mike and Archie were arguing over whether it should be a sock and a sock and a shoe and a shoe,
Right.
or a sock and a shoe and a sock and a
Wow.
shoe.
That's a very Talmudic discussion. I wonder if the screenwriter was Jewish.
Probably.
Pam.
I was reading a book once. It was a fiction, but it was about a Orthodox congregation. And the Orthodox rabbi had to have office hours during the week, just so that people could come in and have the rabbi, you know, ask the rabbi questions to make up these little, you know, things about small problems that most people would solve themselves, but they would go to their Orthodox rabbi, and he had to have office hours.
And I'm trying to encourage that same trend. Before you decide if food in the refrigerator is too old and you should throw it out or eat it, call me. Before you
We'll take
decide
over the
where to go on vacation, call me.
Yeah.
Before you decide what restaurant to go out to, call me, and so forth. Okay, now turn to page 55. I think these little excerpts are very interesting. The reasons for doing mitzvot. In Hebrew, this is ta'amei ha-mitzvot, and this was another big medieval dispute. Why do you observe mitzvot? Does it matter? The one reason is God tells you to observe the mitzvot, period. This is what Cy and Evelyn and Marcia were referring to earlier. Another version is, no, let's look at the reasons for each mitzvah. Why do we do the mitzvah of coming to services Friday night? What is that mitzvah about? And understanding it in detail becomes very important. So there's two views, just accept or question. Obviously, as Reformed Jews, we go with the questioning side, but not everybody did. Okay, let's read these brief things. The first one is Abraham Ibn Ezra, is a Spanish commentator. Who'd like to read these reasons for doing mitzvot, top of page 55, left-hand column? Marcia.
The essential reason for the commandments is to make the human heart upright.
All right, what do you think of that? What does it mean? Reva, Steve?
If I'm scrolling down to the three of them, I think it pretty much tailors with the Maimonides one, which is the third one on the list. I don't know what other people think.
All right, why don't you read the other two then, and we'll...
And this is Isi ben Akabia, I'm not sure. Okay. Each commandment adds holiness to the people of Israel. And the third is Maimonides. The purpose of the mitzvot is to promote compassion, loving kindness, and peace in the world.
Uh-huh.
And to me,
Right.
that's what it looks
Well, my
like.
question is, what does holiness mean?
What is that?
Well, what does holiness mean?
Goodness?
Holiness.
Holiness.
Yeah.
What does that
So
mean?
I'm saying maybe holiness means goodness.
Well,
Goodness related to God.
Right.
When God says do something good, that's holiness. If I tell you to do something good, that's just goodness. So holiness is a good thing that's sanctified by God's blessing. I don't know. Anyone else? What is holiness? Pam?
Holiness to me is following the religious rules.
Oh, but for what purpose?
Just to follow, because of the rule.
No,
I
you
follow
don't
the
follow
rules
just the rules.
I put on the shoes the right way, the way the Talmud says. I do that for 25 years. That makes me holy, just that.
No, to me, holiness has to be at a higher level than shoes.
What is higher? Oh, so I follow the rules about pork.
Yeah,
I
that's
follow all the rules.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to where do you draw the line? To me, holiness is general goodness to other people.
Which is the Maimonides thing.
Yeah.
So I do holiness in order to be good, and that's the purpose of doing the mitzvot. So I put on the shoes the right way because it leads to goodness. Riva and then Sai.
The
Yeah, it
question
seems
then
he's-
becomes, if you're Orthodox, are you holier or more holy than if you're Reformed? Because you're supposedly following the laws.
Well, I would argue that
Tell you to
just
put
doing
your
the
shoes
laws,
on a certain way, you're doing it that way.
I would argue that it's not just doing the laws, but doing the laws has to then lead to something good, or else it's just pointless doing things for the busy work, as they might say. There has to be some benefit, some outcome. If you do stuff that leads you to be better or more good, then that's holiness. If it's just doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff, it's just stuff. Riva.
Yeah, the three quotes that start with reasons for doing mitzvot moves from the individual to make the human heart or a human heart upright. Then it moves to the people of Israel, do the right thing for the people of Israel. And the third one is global. So it moves from the individual to the global, from one quote to the next. So the reasons for doing mitzvot differ in each of the quotes.
And what are the three categories?
Individual, the people of Israel, and global.
Uh-huh. So me as an individual, the community of Israel, and then everybody.
Peace in the
So
world.
but the purpose in all three cases is similar or the same. The first one is to make the human heart upright. The second one is to add holiness to the people of Israel. And the third one is to promote compassion on a worldwide basis.
Right,
So these are similar goals.
right. But
They're
they
not
go,
just about observing the commandment itself, but they're about making you or the community or the world sweeter, more thoughtful, whatever, positive character traits, more grateful, as our course now is talking about gratefulness.
right.
Right? Who's in that course, in the grateful course,
Gratitude course, yeah.
gratitude course?
Lorraine's there.
Isn't Lorraine in there?
Lorraine's in there. Yeah.
Yes.
And is anyone here in the America's for Gods course? Okay, so good. So we've got other groups that don't overlap with this group very much. That's good. That's very good. But yeah, so what do you think? Other comments about the reasons for the mitzvot as seen in these three quotes, or anything else? Minya.
At almost to the end of the next column on page 55, right above Sarna's head, commentators, the mitzvot are a means through which one ensures a place in the world to come. Is that why? I know I have mentioned it before. My sister-in-law is extreme Orthodox. They believe that no matter what they do, it's to have favor with God. And if there's
Right.
any chance that they would make a mistake, well, that's like horrible. They immediately have to go to the rabbi and talk to him about it. But is this a reason? Is this a good reason for following the mitzvot? I didn't include the garment because I didn't know if you were going to talk about that or not.
Yeah, so this is in the Zohar, which is the mystical commentary to the Torah. And it says that mitzvot are a means to ensure a place in the world to come.
Right.
So, because mysticism is looking for the ultimate meaning of existence. So if I mean, if you believe that, that's good, I guess. And that gives you, that's a very different reason from the three in the box,
Right.
which are much more about social utility. You know, you observe the mitzvot so you be a better person, so you help people more. Here it's about you do mitzvot so that you are guaranteed a place in the world to come. You know, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the world to come, you know, but I'm not going to put my shoes on a certain way, you know, just because I think that that's going to get me a place in the world to come. No. Min, you want to respond? Okay, then Riva.
Yeah, my understanding is that when Christianity evolved, there was much greater emphasis on the world to come than within Judaism. And that was one of the big attractions of Christianity, that it to a great deal addressed that wonders of the world to come.
Right. If you're going to practice a religion for 40 or 50 or 60 or 80 or 100 years or 120 years, and you're going to put on your shoes a certain way all that time, it's nice if I can tell you by doing all these things, you are guaranteed a place in the world to come. Or in some forms of Christianity, you can just say, I believe in certain things, and you're automatically in the world to come, regardless of anything that you've done. So they turned it a little bit more toward just accepting certain belief, right? And they say if you don't accept Jesus and get baptized, no
You're
matter
out.
how good you've been, you're out. You can't. You're going to burn in hell for eternity. And so that offends most of us because, you know, we can accept that other religions might be right and we might be wrong, but, you know, to just say you have to believe something that makes no sense to us, and if you don't accept that, you're going to go to hell. That seems very offensive. Marcia and then Bernie.
Well, two things. At death, there's a prayer, the rabbi can forgive you all your sins, so it doesn't much matter. You're going to go to heaven anyway. But secondly, people like that idea of heaven because no matter how miserable their life is on earth, they can look forward to something more wonderful after their death. I think that was a big plus at the time in Christian. It wasn't so much the behavior, I think, but the overriding the miserable life of maybe the Middle Ages or whatever. It was before that, I understand. But the day-to-day life was not an easy one. And they can look forward to heaven.
So we don't need that so much, you're implying, because our lives are
Yes.
much easier.
It
So
is.
we
It's
can
true.
go out to restaurants whenever we want, and we can go on cruises whenever we want, and therefore we don't need as much of a promise of a world to come as people did 1,000 years ago.
Food is available in stores. You don't have to be hunting and gathering and such, you know, and whatever, you know.
But they did find that there was in the 1100s a development of a cruise ship industry, but it was run by Israelis, and so it failed very quickly because they weren't nice enough to the customers, and then cruises didn't get popular again for many hundreds of years after that. All right, that's also not to be taken literally. It's a joke. It's an attempt at a joke. All right, sorry. Bernie.
I'm a little confused here. Do the traditional or Orthodox Jews believe that everybody is guaranteed a place in the world to come? That's what I was taught by my grandfather.
Do the Orthodox believe that if you're Orthodox, you get a place in the world to come? It's very hard to say, but in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, there is a Mishnah that says the following do not have a place in the world to come. And they say people who, you know, do this and don't believe this, and there's a list of supposedly extreme things that if you believe or do, you are denied a place in the world to come. but it's so vague, like much of this in the Talmud, that it's very hard to take that and then say this is what Judaism says about the world to come. But I guess the average Orthodox Jew of the previous generation certainly believed that they were going to go have a place in the world to come. You know, they were good Jews, that they practiced the ritual and they practiced the ethical, you know, as best they could. And so if you these are the two categories that we started out with today. If you practice both the ritual commandments and the ethical commandments, then you should go to heaven, unless you get up in synagogue and say something very extreme, like some things I said at the beginning of today's Torah study about the Torah being written by 4 groups of people. That would not be a smart thing if you were worried about finding a place in the world to come. Fortunately, I have a good relationship with God anyway, and God has promised me not only a place in the world to come, but toward the front.
Counting on that, and you got to carry us along with you.
Guy's got his hand up.
Depends if you make me Rabbi Emeritus in the end, you know. If you don't, it's not my problem. That ceases to be my problem. Sai.
On the bottom of page 55, there's a 2-sentence explanation from me. I'd just like to read it. It says, a potential mitzvah, potential mitzvahs are meant to serve God and uplift life with meaning. Now, there are 2 things there. I don't necessarily buy the first one, but the second one, uplift life with meaning, is as good an answer as any for the mitzvahs. But why are we concerned about, if you will, uplifting God with the mitzvahs?
Well, Judaism is vitally concerned with the relationship between people and God. And part of that is what God wants us to do and what God tells us to do and what God did for us. But part of it, certainly in non-Orthodox Judaism, is how we can influence God. It's supposed to be a relationship both ways. So what we do and what we say and what we try to push is supposed to have an impact on God. And God is supposed to grow and change and respond just as we are. So we don't want, in this way of thinking about Jewish theology, God is not just a, all-powerful, all-knowing entity that we have no impact on, but rather God is something that needs to be impacted as well. And so when we pray, when we ask, when we do, we're trying to say to God certain things. Like, God, in today's world with technology, it's hard for us to understand this. Can you help us understand this? Or, God, you have to change how you feel about certain things because of the world is so different. I don't know. Does that answer you, Sai? Okay. Other comments at the moment? Let's turn for a minute to the page 56 toward the end in the middle, left-hand column. Rabbi David Polish agrees. You see that right in the middle of the page 56, left-hand column, beginning of the paragraph number 3. Rabbi David Polish agrees. Mitzvot, he says, are signs of the covenant, affirmed and reaffirmed through the ages at various turning points at which Jewish existence stood in the balance. So then this is another idea why you should do both the ethical and the ritual commandments, but perhaps especially the ritual commandments, that the ritual commandments, such as going to synagogue on Friday night, are a way that we affirm and reaffirm the covenant between God and Israel. And this covenant is a central or the central religious belief that we have. And in contrast, if you don't do any of the ritual things, then you're neglecting, at the least, this idea of the covenant, the Brit. Comments?
Hmm. They consider
comment.
education an important mitzvah. And in this respect, I think Judaism is radically different from many other religions in that education, being informed, being able to read, being able to perform, to be able to think critically, logically, these are all aspects of education that I think in Judaism is encouraged, expected. Critical thinking, it seems to me. In other words, a person should be informed enough to be able to understand the language, to be able to have enough vocabulary to be able to think with clarity, to be able to express oneself. These are all traits that I was brought up with, that why it was education, even for the women, was prized and expected. And to me, this is a wonderful mitzvah that I understand. In Orthodox Judaism, education for the women is not as critically important. Let's just say that in Western culture, educating the women is as important. And so I think because of that, Western society has progressed much greater than many of the other societies, because the women were included and were educated and have been contributing members. And so the society, I think, has advanced exponentially as a result, because everyone has been educated, whereas elsewhere, perhaps not quite so much. So again, in terms of the rituals, to me, education is a very, very important one for the furthering of Judaism, because it's the women who insist that the kids go to Sunday school or Hebrew school. If it were left in our society, I don't think the men have quite as much say as the Jewish mother who says, you have to go to Cheder, you have to go to Hebrew school, you have to learn. It is the mother who promulgates. And so if the mother is educated, the children will be educated, and therefore Judaism will thrive much more than otherwise.
And that's that what is astounding to me is that the demographers suggest there's hundreds of Jewish families or families that have some Jewish background in the West Valley, and yet it seems very few, if any of them, send them to religious school of any type. So mothers are not the same as they were 50 years ago, clearly.
That's
Okay, any final comments? We're down to our last couple minutes. We are trying to get an Orthodox Jew, a former roommate of mine in college, to come, and maybe he'll come next week. So last week and this week, there were a whole series of questions that we wanted to ask an Orthodox Jew. So if you don't mind writing them down so you don't forget. Last week, we were talking mostly about Mount Sinai and what do Orthodox Jews believe happened up there. This week, we're talking about mitzvot and the role that they see mitzvot as playing, both in their lives in here and now, and also potentially in the world to come. So if you want to write down these questions, if we had an Orthodox Jew here, what would we ask him? So that when we do get one, you can remember and maybe put a reference to the portion that you're referring to, or the discussion in Harvey Field's and page and paragraph that you can then cite, so we can, show him that we know as much as we do know. I
We'd ask
also
him about
want
his
to,
shoes.
yeah, we'll ask him. I mean, I don't know if he does that or not. So Yeah, he may get embarrassed and say, no, he does, he just puts his shoes on in the morning in any particular order. I also wanted to invite everybody to our Saturday morning service. We have a wonderful guitarist. It's held in a private home in Sun City Grand. It's once a month and it's this Saturday. So we'd love to have you. You can sign up in the office. It's free. And you just bring a little potluck. We do an informal service. We gather at 10. We do the service at 10:30 to about 11:30. And the guitarist's name is Eris Kessler. He comes from the eastern part of the city. He works full time at the JCC, and he's really, really nice. And you know, it's a lot of fun. And then there's a potluck brunch. I'll turn it over to Reva and Steve to say goodbye and to do the
Okay.
final blessing.
Reva, go ahead if you have a couple of your announcements.
No, I don't have any announcements today, Steve. It's all yours.
Okay, just a reminder, the can-do item for this month is vegetables. So, and then also too, on the 23rd of this month, we have arranged to have a tour of the Valley View Food Bank. So if you're interested in seeing how they distribute food to individuals who are in need, then you're welcome to join us. You need to call the temple to make arrangements to and have your reservation put in. So those are two things I have to say. And then one more thing. The Kavod Award is going to be presented to our Pam Katz and also Bonnie Longmire on the 3rd of March. Friday night. There's a potluck first at 5:15. And we want to encourage a lot of people to join us and to support and recognize these two individuals who have worked so hard for our temple. So make arrangements, put it on your calendar and be there. Let us conclude then with the final blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah v'kodesh Chai olam
Baruch
Notein Torah. Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us the teaching of truth, implanted within us eternal life. Blessed is Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen. All right,
Amen.
everyone, have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you Friday night at Temple. Good night.
Bye. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rabbi.
You would book
Interesting
over.
discussion.
Steve, are you gone?
Yes, we're
Is
done.
anybody still there?
We're done.
I'm trying to
We're
figure
done.
out-
Yeah, I'm gonna leave now.
I know that. Hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
What time is Friday night?
What time is Friday night? 7 o'clock, our time.
Oh, I know that, but I couldn't get on last Friday. And I
Oh.
wanna know,
Contact the office and they will send you the correct link.
same one I've used all the time.
Oh, well, I don't know.
I got last week's Torah study, and I got the Friday night service from January 27th. But
Okay.
I couldn't get the one from last week.
There was a problem, I think,
Have any idea?
with the YouTube service that they were trying to put out. So I don't know. I can't answer.
Maybe that was it. I'll try again this Friday.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
It is,
appreciate
I know it was recorded, so you should be able to find it on YouTube.
Okay,
All right,
okay. I'll see you
take care.
Thank you. I'll
Lorraine?
see you next week.
Thanks.
Good to
Bye-bye.
see you, young lady. Keep smiling. Bye-bye.
Bye.